Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel BPMN Guru, and welcome to the first video in what I hope will be many videos where I'm answering questions which have been posed to me through my channel. So this question comes from a lady in Colorado in the States regarding a debt management process. So this lady sent me a few attachments of their as-is process, which she tells me doesn't really represent what actually happens. The process hasn't been mapped too well, and they're looking to correct that. They're looking to map the process more accurately, but at the same time they're looking to make improvements to the process because this is to inform the rollout of a new debt management system. So rather than show you what she sent me, I've took the essence of what's in the as-is process that she's emailed to me, and I've created from that a very high level process, which fundamentally is three main stages. There's the first stage, which is the letters stage, where they're sending letters to the customer to say that they're in debt, and there's a number of letters sent at this stage. And then if that doesn't work, then they move to a home visit stage where they're visiting the customer at their home, knocking on the door and hopefully getting a payment that way. And if that stage doesn't work, then they go to legal action where they take the customer to court. So it's quite a standard debt collection process. But what I'm going to look at initially is the letters stage, because when I looked at the overall process, it was this stage that seemed the most problematic in terms of what they had mapped and what they were trying to achieve. So this is the letters stage of the process, which I've redrawn using the BPMN template in Lucid Chart. It's worthwhile me pointing out that what was sent through to me didn't use any BPMN symbols. It looked as though it had been drawn using Word, using the standard flowchart symbols that you get in Word. So I've redrawn this using Lucid Chart, BPMN stencil, just to make things easier for myself really. But it pretty much mirrors what was in the as-is process that was sent to me. So what we have is a start event, and then we have a task which says 14 days after the payment due. So if the payment was due on the 1st of May, I assume that on the 15th of May, if the payment still hasn't been made, then they ask this question: has the payment been made? Yes, they send a standard payment confirmation to the customer, but if no, at this stage they send the first letter to the customer. After the first letter has been sent, they wait another 14 days, and again they've just used a task box to illustrate the waiting of 14 days. And after that, after the first letter has been sent, they then ask the same question again: has payment been made? And I'm assuming that they're asking whether the debt has been paid in full. There wasn't anything on the process diagram to illustrate a part payment, and that's something that I'm going to discuss with this lady. So again, they ask the question: has the debt been paid? If yes, they send the standard letter, and this letter here is the same letter that's sent here. There's no difference. They're all exactly the same. If the debt hasn't been paid, they then send a second letter to the customer, after which they wait 28 days. They then ask the same question again: has the debt been paid? And if it has, again they send this same standard letter. It's the same letter that's sent at these two stages here. And if the debt has not been paid, they send a final letter to the customer. And that's where the letters stage, or the letters sub-process, ends, and it goes into the next stage, which is the visit stage. So what I'd like to do now is just to jump in and see how we might model this in a more simple way. So I'll just create a new page here. So I suppose there are a number of ways that this process could start, but I'm going to use a timer event for now, and from that timer event, which I will call the payment due date. We know that after the payment due date, one or two things can happen. A full payment will be received, or will reach this 14 days after it was due. So there's a couple of ways that we can handle this, but the most logical way is to use an event-based gateway. So I'll drop a gateway in here, and we know that there are two events coming off that, we can either receive a payment, oh, right, I'll change it around to receive payment just to be verb noun, and the other option is that we reach the 14 days. So if I put here 14 days after payment due, they're the two events that could possibly occur after this event-based gateway. Now, if we do reach the 14 days, then that's the stage where we need to send the letter to the customer. This is the first letter. Send first letter. After the first letter is sent, we're in a similar position where we wait another 14 days and we either receive a payment or we don't. So what we could actually do here is we could add another event-based gateway, and let's just copy these two over because we're going to use the same events. I'm going to drop them in here. Okay, so we've got the same sort of scenarios that we've got back here. This time we're sending the first letter, and on the next stage we're going to be sending the second letter. I'll just change that to second. Now, if you remember from the initial process that I mapped out, the letter stage that I mapped out here, the next stage of the process is where we are waiting 28 days this time before sending the final letter. So again, I will just model this here, copy that over, attach this to here, and copy this over for our final payment, final letter rather. And that looks as though on the surface to be something like what we're looking for in terms of the letter stage process. But you probably won't be surprised to hear that that's not a very efficient way of modelling this process. So let's look at it a bit more closely. We can see here that we're modelling the process to show that we're waiting 14 days after the payment due date. Now here, even though I've mislabeled this, I probably just need to correct that. So this is 14 days after letter 1. So that wasn't payment due. And the other event I have needs to be 28 days after letter 2. That's correct now. So you can see that the payment due date, we wait 14 days, payment still hasn't been received, so we send the first letter. After that, we wait 14 days after letter 1 has been sent, and then we send the second letter, and then we wait 28 days after letter 2 has been sent, and we send the final letter. But that's not efficient at all, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this part of the process and everything downstream of that. And we're going to look at how we can model this process a little bit more efficiently. So you can see that we've sent the first letter to the customer, and just for presentation purposes I'm just going to move this up here. You'll see why in a moment. We've waited 14 days after the payment due date and we've sent the first letter to the customer, and we know that after that we have to wait another 14 days. So I could create a loop back from here. So I'm just going to loop this back to the event-based gateway, showing that it's coming back in. Now, it's quite acceptable to have a number of timer events hanging off a event-based gateway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that. I'm going to add another one here. And this time I'm going to label that with after, oh sorry, beg your pardon, 14 days after letter 1. And I'm going to bring down an output from the event-based gateway. And we know that after 14 days of letter 1, it's letter 2 that we're sending. So bring that down to here. Connect that there. And similarly for the third letter, we'll add another timer event, and this time it's 28 days after letter 2. And we'll connect that to the event-based gateway. We'll just copy this out down, and that's send the final letter to the customer. Okay. Now for each one of we need to loop this back as well, which might look a little bit messy for now, but I'll tidy that. I'll show you how we can tidy that up in a moment. Each of those are looping back to the event-based gateway, where it's looking back to see which event is going to occur next. So let's go through this now we've remodeled it. So the payment is due, and 14 days after the due date we haven't received a payment, because if we did, this would have been triggered first and we would never reach this event. 14 days after the payment due, we send the first letter to the customer, and then what we need to do is we need to loop back and say, well, what's happened now? What event occurred after that? Obviously if we'd received a payment, it would trigger the same receive payment event, but if it didn't, it could only trigger this event. It can't possibly trigger this event here because letter 2 hasn't been sent yet. So we're looking at 14 days after letter 1. Letter 1's previously gone, which means that we would then send the second letter to the customer. Then we loop back to the event-based gateway, and at this stage we can either receive a payment, or we can go to the 28 days after the letter 2 is sent. We can't possibly go to 14 days after letter 1 because that's already happened. That event happened on the previous iteration, and this can't happen because that's already happened on the first iteration through the event-based gateway. So we can loop back each time. I can tidy this up a little bit by getting rid of these lines that loop back. So a way to do this is to use a link. So I'll just get rid of those lines there. And quite a neat way of tidying this up is to just have a line like that going into a throwing link. I'll just label that as A, and then we'll have a catching link over here, which we'll also label as A. And that just shows that the process jumps from over here to over here. I think you'll agree it just tidies things up a little bit, makes it a little bit more neater. So that's the way that we would model that. And obviously after the third letter, the final letter has been sent, then that would end that sub-process and it would go on to the visits stage of the process. Okay, so far we've looked at the use of the timer events in this sub-process, but I haven't really looked at the message event, the receive payment message event. And I just wanted to touch on this because I wouldn't actually model it this way to show the receive payment in this sub-process. So let me just get rid of that. There's probably a better way of modeling this. So if we think back to the high-level view of the process, we know that at any stage of this debt collection process, the customer could make a payment at the letter stage, at the home visit stage, or at the legal action stage, and that would cease the debt recovery process. Now, at the moment, we have the receiving the payment at this letter stage, but in order to model this correctly, we'd have to have a receive payment event in each of these sub processes, but there is an easier way to do it. So one way to do it would be to add a expanded subprocess. Now I just need to push this to the back so that I can drag these into it. So what I would have is I would have an expanded subprocess like this, and I would drop all of those into the expanded subprocess. So I just need to get rid of these. For now, I'd have a start event outside of the subprocess, and I'd have an end event outside the subprocess as well. So let's just focus on the boundary of the subprocess. So as we know, at any stage we could receive a payment which would interrupt the debt collection activity. So what we could do here is we could drop onto the boundary an event, message event, to say full payment received. And that effectively would stop the debt collection process. So you may have some tasks which occur after that. You may send a letter to the customer again thanking them for the payment. So let's put here just send letter. But once the full payment is received, that would terminate the process no matter what stage of the process it's in. So what I would use here, I would have an event type and I would have a terminate event, and we could call the end event debt cleared. So having the full payment received here on the boundary of all of these subprocesses, or the parent boundary of the subprocesses, we don't need to model the receiving of a payment in each of these subprocesses. To have it at the higher level is probably a better way of modeling this, and it looks a little bit tidier. So that's how I would model that individual letter stage and how I would cater for a full payment being received at any stage of the debt collection. I hope that helps in some way of understanding how it's best to use event-based gateways and events like messages and timers, and also how you can use boundary events for modelling events that could happen over various stages of a process. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and keep an eye out for the next video.